When I was researching my book, I came across something online called An Open Letter to Roy Lessin. So first I'm going to tell you who Roy Lessin was. And so I've been saving these two books, these two wonderful parenting books. One is called Spanking, Why, When, How, and the other one, a newer version, Spanking, A Loving Discipline. And the person who's on the line, Bethany Britton, is now an old friend of mine. I'm very happy to say hi, Bethany.
Hi, it's good to talk to you.
It's so great to hear your voice. And the reason why I wanted our audience to hear from Bethany is because she grew up in a church that Roy Lessin was a member of and actually kind of an authority figure. And so her parents and other adults in that community were drawing directly from the source, if you will, about using physical punishment to control children. And so with that, Bethany, I don't know how much you've been able to hear of what we've said so far, but why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and fill us in terms of the world you came from as a child.
Thank you. So yes, Roy Lessin was a deacon in our church and was pretty much the authority on how to raise godly children. And my parents met Shar and Roy about the time that I was pretty small. I was still an infant. My mother would tell a story about how great this theology was. And she would tell a story about the time that I had my first sin experience. She wanted to lay me down for a nap, and I turned bright red and started screaming. And she made sure that there wasn't a diaper pin or anything that was a problem, and then picked me back up and gave me my very first spanking at 6 months old. And she was amazed at how sinful a child could be, because when she laid me back down, I cried again. And so she picked me back up and spanked me again. And eventually, I stopped crying. And so she would tell this story again and again as a way of showing how important it was for parents to recognize sin, even in a 6-month-old. And so in my church, the youngest that was ever hit that I know about was 5 months old. So that was the basis of their theology, is that children are born sinful and that they must be corrected immediately.
And before you joined us, I wanted you to know, I've got this stack of all these Christian parenting books, and I was reading quotes about sinfulness from them. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Thank you. I would love to burn them, but it's important to talk about.
I just want you to know I bought them all used. The authors got no money from what I purchased.
Fantastic. So this theology was incorporated into my household, and there were things that were really important to my parents, such as absolute obedience. So if we were asked to do something, we had to do it immediately, or it was determined that we were not obeying. Slow obedience is not obedience. And my parents would tell you that they were really clear on what the rules were in our household, and that they were very open about what we needed to do. But being a child raised in it, I can tell you that it was very confusing. It was often really difficult. I was born with the normal attention span of any little kid, so I would often forget or not be paying attention. And so the spankings came out of nowhere and were often really confusing and hard to deal with, and definitely left scars on me as I've grown up. I'm 50 now, and I'm still healing from those experiences.
I'm so sorry.
So would there be another direction you would like me to explain about the theology?
Claire or Dale, do you have any questions for Bethany at this point?
I do. I wonder what your relationship with your parents is like now.
Well, a year ago, I would have told you that we reached a point where it's very neutral. I'm not a big part of their lives anymore. But as of the last couple of months, I've actively cut ties. I'm at a point where they're not willing, even in conversations where they seem to be somewhat sad about what they've done, they come back to the Christian narrative as being more important than us. And I'm at a point now where I'd like my life to be a lot more happier. And so I think to reach that, I'm going to need to let them go. And I don't really know what that means, but I have stopped communicating, stopped checking in. I'm probably not going to be celebrating my mom's birthday. I'm really, really pulling away.
I support your decision in that. I had to make the same decision with
It's hard.
my mother. It's hard, but in the same breath, I can certainly tell you it's easier. You don't have to. I wouldn't put up with that sort of behavior from anyone else in my life. I would like to have a parent, but I don't need a parent. And if I have a choice, I don't need that in my life. I don't need abuse.
Saying that.
Yeah, nobody needs abuse. And there are other people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that I've let them go. It's given me space to really feel all of the feelings. And one of the things that happens with this kind of parenting is the children, I never learned how to sit with uncomfortable emotions. I never learned to self-soothe. And so I get overwhelmed at times with emotions, and I do have PTSD. But having them step back, it's allowed me to kind of feel those pre-verbal horrors that I think I was not able to sit with. And one of the things I would love for parents to understand is that just because an infant is small doesn't mean they're going to forget what happened. And
No.
it has a huge impact. We always think about toddlers being hit or small children, but infants, I can't tell you how sick I am that theology is out there and adopted by parents.
Yeah, the science behind it is there. It's called a somatic memory. And I can tell you that in my house, we have firsthand experience with that because my son, when he was an infant, required some extraordinarily painful shots. He was only a few months old, and he only had 2 of them. But the older he got, the more phobic he was of shots. And I'm not talking about the way most kids are, like, ooh, scared, like trying to get out the door, hiding under the physician's thing. True terror. And yeah, and when he, we had to do what's called EMDR. It's a method of desensitizing.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with it.
Right, yeah, me too. Anybody who's having a really messed up past has to do MDR pretty much, and to digest these things more quickly. And through that, he's now able to get a shot without crawling out of his skin. It's still a little scary for him. And when you get back into that memory, it's there. To him, as an infant, he thought he was dying. It was so painful.
Yeah.
And of course you're going to be terrified of something that you think is killing you. And it goes straight to that limbic part of your brain, and there's no logic that's going to get in there. Forget it. So yeah, I get the whole somatic memory. It doesn't matter how small you are. You remember things. You remember associations. And you don't have to have the words for it if it's that extreme. And I am so sorry that your parents put you through that. They're supposed to be the people who love you and keep you safe. And to have them be the exact opposite, I have some experience with that. And I know how hard it is to get past it and get through it.
Yeah, it brings to mind, as I hear you talk, one of the first steps in healing I took was reading Alice Miller's book, The Body Never Lies, and she hits right what you're saying in a very profound way. So I highly recommend that book to anyone who's trying to put pieces back together again.
That's interesting you brought that up. I brought with me, just to kind of balance things out here, some great books about parenting, folks that talk specifically about the dangers of physical punishment and the importance of how to relate to your child in ways that don't involve causing pain, harm, discomfort, and so forth. So, and 3 of the books that I have happen to be by Alice Miller.
Yay!
And this,
She's great.
yeah, she grew up with terrible abuse, terrible emotional neglect as well. Her mother was just really a
There it is.
horrible parent. And so what I have here is, and if anyone has any comments about any of these books, I'll just read them out because I think all of her work has been so enlightening to people, especially survivors of abuse. So this one is Banished Knowledge, The Body Never Lies, the one that Bethany just talked about, The Truth Will Set You Free, and For Your Own Good. And there are lots of her writings are online, and I'll just kind of quickly go through some of these other books. Murray Strauss wrote a lot about and talked a lot about the harms of corporal punishment, and he wrote this book, Beating the Devil Out of Them, which I talk about in my book, actually, this idea that you're literally getting some sort of demonic force out of a child. As crazy as that sounds, it's really, when you're raised in a culture like that, you don't really question it or, whether it's rational or not. Then I also have a few that are written by people of faith. And I just want to make it clear that there is, there are many communities, Christian and otherwise, that don't support these authoritarian ideas. And one book that's written by a teacher and now director of a seminary here in Austin. His name is David Jensen, and he wrote a faith-based book about caring for children in a compassionate way called Graced Vulnerability. So I bring this up because some people have called in the past and said, well, I'm part of this religious culture. I really want to talk to them about the harms of physical punishment. How do I do that? And there are some great books about it that are written by Christian authorities. This is a book called The Child's Song, written by Don Apps. He was a theology professor at Princeton. And then finally, I have the Discipline book by William Sears. Dr. Sears and his wife have put out a lot of great writing about compassionate parenting. So, Dale, do you have anything that you might want to ask Bethany while she's with us?
Well, I want to second what Jan said and absolutely reinforce your idea to pull away. I talk to parents a lot about ways to have these conversations, ways to try to repair the relationship, how to approach it in a way that won't make the parents, your parents, defensive. So there are lots of things to try. And there is a point at which you have to be done. You have to say, I made the best effort I could make and pull away. And it really does sound like you reached that point very intelligently and did what you had to do. I would also second what Jan was saying, this awareness of resources for Christian parents is actually really important, because one of the things we can do as people who have a research-based understanding of corporal punishment, they are not necessarily going to approach it in the same way that we did. They're not necessarily going to respond to the same resources that I have. So to have some books by Christian parenting authors like William Sears that you mentioned, the Discipline book is really a very good book. That's a good resource to be able to point them to. Now, I want to make sure we're talking about William Sears, not Bob Sears, who is his son and who has some problematic views about vaccines. That's a different Dr. Sears. Very confusing. William Sears is the one. There's another Christian parenting book that I recommend when I'm talking to Christian parents called Parenting with Love and Laughter. And it very simple. There's a huge amount of overlap between the non-religious parenting, the secular parenting model, and the model advocated by progressive Christian authors like that. I can't remember the name of the author, but the book is Parenting with Love and Laughter. And those are the sorts of things that can begin to open that conversation in that community so that we can start to, the people who are predisposed to peeling away from that nonsense, that, and who can help us break the cycle, because that's one of the things that we have to do here. That's one of the things that you have done and that we're doing. If we can have one generation that isn't subject to corporal punishment, they are then less likely to inflict it on their own children. So it really just takes our generation stopping that practice with ours. So thank you for being part of this conversation and for helping to make that decision with your own life.
Thank you. And I really appreciate this conversation because it's going in two directions. One is for the parents that are parenting now, and then those of us who are healing from bad parenting. So that's a really important conversation, and I'm really happy that you were willing to include both of those.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great point. Bethany, anything that you can tell us about your life now and where your focus might be? What have you, other types of self-care have you're practicing for yourself?
Sure. I'm an instructional designer, which means I build training for corporations, and I got into that field because of the learning in psychology and wanting to figure out how to motivate people outside of fear. And so that's kind of been my focus in my professional world. I will say that 4 years ago, I came down with an autoimmune disease. I have a disease called pemphigoid. My body is literally rejecting my skin. So I've been in cancer treatment. And I'm very sure that my past trauma has led or exacerbated this. And so I have been learning to be patient. One of the byproducts of authoritarian parenting is you learn to distrust, if not dislike, your body. And so pemphigoid has been a wake-up call for me to really respect my body and learn how it works and learn how to take care of its needs. One of the biggest things about authoritarian parenting is the parent's needs usually outweigh the child's. So I grew up, disregarding what I needed. And so pemphigoid has been I wouldn't say fabulous teacher, definitely a hard one, but I'm taking the lessons in and I'm changing my life. And I'm happier. I know that sounds weird, but I'm a lot happier, and I have a lot of community, and so I feel very, very supported.
Makes perfect sense to me. And just to affirm again what you're talking about, I have experienced the same thing. I only in my late 40s, early 50s, connected to my physical person.
Yep.
I didn't understand a lot of things about touch and what it meant until fairly recently.
Yep.
Yeah. When people would say, if you feel bad, do you want a hug? I'd be like, yeah, whatever. And then through really great counseling, the woman who is now my mother of choice, I guess you could say, Mama Victoria, I love you. She taught me how to accept touch. And the way when I knew it happened was, this is a personal story, but bear with me. I was on the couch, I had frozen shoulder, the dog jumped on my shoulder and torqued it, which is tearing all sorts of tissue, and I just shrieked in agony. It was really painful. And all of a sudden, my husband and my 2 children were just physically on me, holding me, and I felt better. It was the first time in my life that touch actually felt like something to me. So I get what you mean about being disconnected and learning how to accept what your body is telling you. It's you don't know that you don't have it until you do have it.
And I think you're bringing up a really good point about the harm of physical neglect.
Yep.
I was physically abused as a kid, not anything near what Bethany suffered, but I was beaten with a belt by a very strong person who happened to be my father. but there was also persistent, everyday, ongoing physical neglect in that no one, very rarely, would anyone give me a hug, you know? So there was that coldness, and it's harder to really kind of identify because it's something that's not there, that you don't know you're supposed to have as a nutrient in a way of life. So
I remember sitting in church and just wanting to lean on my father, and he'd tell me, "Sit up straight." I mean, okay, I get it. We get it. So things are moving forward and getting better in our own parenting. Although I do have, like I said, a story to tell myself if we have time.
And I think I would like to hear it, but I do want to say that, I feel like I'm in my 50s now, and I think that this is a time of life when a lot of people are realizing how their past affects their lives, their choices, their happiness, and really start to explore ways to seek out healthier and healthier lives. And I'm really glad that I'm at that point, and that other people I know are at that point in their I want to say usually it seems late 40s, 50s, and early 60s, but I would love for that to happen sooner for people.
Right. Yes.
And it really does take a while before you let go of some of the things you just felt like you had to hold on to with an iron fist because
reasons
because that's what you associated with who you were, who you were as a child.
Totally.
And then you hopefully get to a point earlier where you can, as Bethany has done, let that go and have confidence in your own abilities, your own worth, your values, and how important those are, and how good they make you feel.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. Earlier is better.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Anything else?
Well, if I meet any of you in person, I will totally offer you a hug.
Awesome.
Oh.
Awesome. I love hugs now.
Great. And Bethany, you and I are going to
too.
catch up more soon. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just really appreciate your guys' work. I think it's really important. So thank you for doing it and supporting so many of us.
And thank you for telling us what you've told us. It was extremely important.
Thank you for joining us so much.
Thanks, Bethany.
Thank you. Be well.
You too.